All right, big question. Here's the answer to it. How long should you train before attempting selection or buds? And before I give some sort of absolute, understand that absolutes in no way, shape, or form do anything for anyone until we can quantify them, right? And so, like, I look at this a little bit differently and say, what's really the root of this is like, how can someone quantify if they're ready or not, right? Because it's, if you want a time, need a time, the only time that really matters to me or should to anyone is if you're getting older in age and you're getting closer to that point where you need a waiver because you're 28 to 30 years old. But all I see with absolutes, with people that need them and need to have those right now, I see just I see a future quitter and I see weakness. That's what I see, because that's what ends up being is people that need these absolutes. What you're seeing is someone trying to justify if the effort is worth it. And you don't know, right? It's not a sport. Prepping for selection isn't a sport where you, like baseball when you're younger, where you can dip your toe, you could try it, you see if you like it. If you don't like it, you can quit and go back to your life that you had. In the military, you don't get that opportunity. So what I really think is the people that are honestly asking this question isn't, they're not trying to negate the work. They're trying to understand, okay, what am I measuring and how do I do this to know, like, if my length of time is sufficient for being physically prepared. I kind of like word it that way. And so we're going to get into some things that are relative, and then we're going to expand upon like one of the first videos we did about benchmarks. Because once you take those benchmarks to help quantify where your progress is, the benchmarks also help you quantify your timeline, okay? Because what we really look at is, like I said, absolutes, saying this is exactly what you need to do, absolutely, and you'll be fine, because we see there's one common thread in buds. For your first phase candidates, every single person passed their PST. That's the only, and I guess the other thing, the only other quantifiable thing, right, that's an absolute is that everyone was male. So everyone was male, everyone passed their PST now. What does that mean? Because we know that the people that had the best scores in the PSTs, there's no guarantee for success. And also people that didn't score super well in the PST, that also doesn't quantify failure. So what we're looking at is success is really created in the process, right? Not the outcome of, and we see that a lot of times, like, what does that mean? It means your training prepared you for selection, not just the PST. And so let me break down the things that matter. So what is it, how does it, if we're taking our benchmarks that we talked about in a previous video, how do we start structuring enough time, and what matters, okay? Because like I said, we're working towards known successful benchmarks outside of the PST. We want to use the PST. It's great. It's a great, basically, starting marker to go, okay, these are some quantifiable numbers. And then we start breaking the run down within our splits. We see even more quantifiable numbers. We break the swim down into splits. We see more quantifiable numbers. And in person, what we see is when we have people do push-ups, it's not how many push-ups necessarily they do. We see at what point does their push-up, their acceleration begin to slow down? Or have they not practiced it enough to see, okay, I'm going to cluster X number of reps together. I'm going to come to the leaning rest, take some good relinquishing breaths, do another cluster, then do another cluster. Or is it just kind of we have no script and have not practiced that script? Because that's what we really want to do, is we want to practice properly, not just practice how often I can get into failure, okay? Another thing that matters is, what is your current state of readiness? Because that's why we can't say it's going to take this long, because if you're a Division I wrestler, All-American wrestler from Purdue, and that was someone in my buds class before me, or are you a sedentary, basically comparative high school student that all of a sudden is like, man, I really want to go be a special operator, ranger, buds, whatever it is might be. We can't be this, they're not the same starting point. And that's okay, because like, if someone is very, very, very physically active in their young years, they've developed in a way. If they weren't, they missed a window of development. But that doesn't mean that you can't make up that development at 18, because someone that comes out of high school, they trained really, really hard for a year and a half, and when they came out of high school, they played a whole sorts of sports. that 18 months for that 18 to 19 to 20-year-old, that developmental window is big. But again, if you were fairly sedentary, very inactive, maybe you were more focused on scholastics and not physical stuff and sports, well, at 18, being an older person than you were young, you can make up that, right? It's just going to take a little bit more time and effort, right? And that's where we say what also matters, again, is your athletic history, right, versus your sedentary history. And so there's a couple things to consider when we're looking at this is like, again, because we can make up the time. Because here's where it gets really cool for, unless you were incredibly sedentary in high school, let's say you skateboarded a lot, you did sort of non-traditional type sports, you stayed fairly active, you didn't let yourself physically go, but maybe you weren't the high school wrestler and all these sort of things. But you got to figure, like, let's say the 12 to 18-year-old athlete, there's only so much development they can do because they're in the midst of puberty. So we take that skateboarder that wasn't playing a ton of traditional sports, but at 18, they're like, you know what, I want to give this a shot. And I use skateboarders a lot because skateboarders tend to be very, very successful in special operations, very durable, very athletic, but they didn't develop all these traditional physical traits. But that 18-year-old decides to go in and they give themselves a year or two to get ready. Well, they're post-puberty and they mature and develop biologically much different than they would have if they started at 12, right? It's just, you like I was saying, like, you might miss a window, but you can really make a lot of improvements and gain and shorten, like do all those sort of things after 18 too. And that's why we're such a big proponent of the biological age to go, well, if you're still in that maturing phase at 18, like I was a very small 18-year-old per 17, 18. I was still maturing. And that's why I always say the 22-year-old Jeff could have whooped the tail on the 18-year-old Jeff. The 18-year-old Jeff wasn't ready for buds, in my opinion. But at 22, when I went through, I had done all this physical maturing, right? And it doesn't mean I was a really, really hard worker. Like at 12 years old and on, man, I was like Tasmanian devil, man. I was like the Energizer Bunny. Like nobody outworked me, right? I grew up in a wrestling community with literally all Americans in the Big Ten. But I was small. I was underdeveloped until my work ethic married up with my biological age in my late 18, 19, 20 years of life. Then I really physically matured at an incredible rate, and then it was time for me to go in. I knew I was ready, right? I felt it. I felt because of I had used benchmarks in track and field and swimming and weightlifting and push-ups and all these sort of things, right? And so I also want to look at your quality time spent, which also matters, versus the quantity of just arbitrary volume. And that's what we get to, along with that biological age and athletic history, is like the more we stay athletically involved, what really tends to happen for a lot of people is they become more athletically focused. So, you know, the weight room sessions, the calisthenic sessions, the running and swimming sessions for that 17-year-old, we'll say, will evolve into some really mature, high-performing running, swimming, calisthenics when they're 19, 20 years old. So again, we're getting to the point of like people want to go, well, what's my timeline? How many months and years? And we go, well, are you 8? That's why we don't train kids, right? We want to interface with people at 18, at least 18, so we know that we have biological age on our favor. We know that we can speak to them in a way that, hey, you are physically mature enough to really interface with quality and not just do a ton of push-ups. We look at what it comes back, like I said, we're going back. It improves that current state of readiness, right? And then we're actually working towards known benchmarks, and then you have that right timeline. So I just keep kind of repeating these things because these are a bit of a moving target, but they're not if you start engaging, like I said, at these points. Okay, so then how are we going to do this? How are we measuring this? Okay, how do we quantify quality time, biological age, athletic history, and working towards a successful benchmarks? Well, quality programming. When you engage in quality programming, the programming gives you benchmarks within the program, and then we marry those up to the PST. Right? And that's what we're talking about the previous video on benchmarks. When we have the PST, we have our PST kickers, And then we have other benchmarks within our hypertrophy, within our strength, within our power and speed, within our rucking, within our swimming. And we start accumulating all these sort of biological benchmarks over time within a quality structure. You can chart progress. You can very visibly see the places where you're not progressing in other ways. Like that's where I say we're going to always work our weaknesses first, because if we do that, we won't have any weaknesses. And a lot of people have this misconception like, hey, I'm a great runner, but I'm not very good in my strength endurance. And so they tend to favor their strength, like running, we'll say, and they're like, well, I'll make it up on the back end, but because they're afraid of losing their strengths. If you have a strength, you don't lose it. So the same vice versa. If, like, let's say you have some really good strength attributes, but you're not the greatest runner, like, well, I can't run that much because I'm going to lose my gains. Like, that doesn't work that way, right? You get the best of both worlds when you find a balance, and that's what we're trying to say is we don't want to lean on our strengths. We don't want to neglect our weaknesses. We want to have a good consistency with the quality programs and look at our weaknesses first. And then we create a real balance. Okay. The next thing, like I was saying, that's well-rounded training. That balance is well-rounded training, right? When we come to training for selection, it's not just running. There's other ways to do cardio. It's not just calisthenics. There's other ways to build strength. It's not just weight room stuff, because we don't want to neglect calisthenics. It's not just, well, I'm a really good runner. I'm a really good, we don't negate anything. And so part of that quality program is to create balance using all of those benchmarks, and that establishes this timeline, okay? And that it keeps going back to reliable benchmarks, okay? Because the whole goal is, because we know that the only two things that are like you equal in selection is you're male and you pass the PST, but that's not enough. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're training for selection, not training for the PST. Okay, so kind of let me bracket it in here a little bit. Because the way that we establish, we don't train kids. We don't train young kids. And it's not because young kids aren't good people and they're not willing to work hard, but because we know that benchmarks that are worth measuring, they're not worth measuring until you're at least 18. And so we look at an 18-year-old, we say, hey, if an 18-year-old trains really vigilantly for 18 months, maybe a year, right? We have established everything we've talked about. We know we have physical maturity, that we can work real credible benchmarks from, because we're not getting credible benchmarks from a 14-year-old kid. We can get really credible benchmarks from an 18-year-old young man and a 19-year-old young man and a 20-year-old and so on. We can really start having these mature conversations about and that's what happens when we fall into a good program, right? Not only do we see good numbers or numbers happening towards our benefit, you can start projecting real timeline. Because if you have a really good progress in 6 months at 18, you know what? You're also going to have exceptionally good progress over the next 6 months, probably to similar or better trajectory depending on where your focus is at. And so when you start getting that biological age, creating benchmarks in a relative good program and over time, it becomes really, really obvious that good programs with focused individuals will get you to a really reasonable training state and a really good durability state for selection within 18 months. We really see that. And that also, then you go see a recruiter at a real more physical mature advantage in that time, because what we see, like I said before, the secret isn't a particular number. The secret is when you have trained vigilantly with a good program at good biological age for an 18-month period, you can look back and go, I know I can endure a 6-month selection course because I had enough focus, effort, following a program, watch my benchmarks for 18 months. Like that's real mental toughness. And when you've established those, you can actually confidently going, I know I prepared for selection. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that 18 months of real defined, clear work is the benchmark. That's the best of it, right? Because The only time that, like I said at the beginning of this video, the only time that might be a bit of a problem is if you're at the 28, 29 year mark and you might be running into a waiver. But the reality is also too, people are like, well, what if you are properly trained with the proper biological age of the proper timeline using proper programs, you can be ready for BUDS, Ranger School, SFAS, PJ, MARSOC, the list goes on and on. Good training, following these guidelines gives you options. But if you don't follow good programming, good training at a biological age, everyone has this urgency like, I gotta go, I gotta go, I gotta go. No, you don't. Your best option is to be prepared. Because if you look at the statistics of BUDS, Ranger School, SFAS, PJ School, and MARSOC, not even so MARSOC because you have to be E5, but my point is this. The highest attrition rate in all special forces, BUDS, and Ranger School are 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. As we get older, 22, 23, you see a dramatic increase in probability of completion. Biological age, following a good program and process, is going to give you the time to evaluate benchmarks that get you closer to that success rate. So be patient and follow good programs, and you will be successful.